We continue our discussion on the crime situation in TNT. Of course, we mentioned it earlier this week. Recently, businessmen, business chambers, they've been calling for more access to firearm users' licenses. And they've even been calling for, well, a greater use of the death penalty as crime goes out of control. I don't know if, ladies and gentlemen, you have noticed that home invasions and robberies seem to be more brazen, more blatant, and potentially more violent. Joining us to speak on the matter, as she usually does on Thursdays, we have Opposition Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial, member of the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Good morning, Senator Medial.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me again.
No, thank you for joining us.
So, business community, and I'm sure you might have heard from members, the desire to defend yourself. But we do live in a society where there's also a very real concern, not just of vigilante justice, where potentially the wrong person might be attacked in retaliation, but also once we have access to firearms, disputes in everyday life might turn quick to violence. So is this a balance, a compromise that might be looking just too attractive to people now and we might be willing to take the risks?
So, firstly, a couple of things. Home invasions have now become sort of the crime of choice. It's becoming very, very. It's not linked to the typical drug and gang warfare. It's really just robberies taking place in the sanctity of your home, and it's becoming way too commonplace. One can or may say it's linked to reduced economic activity, hardship, etc. People resort to this type of crime. I'm not saying that hardship is an excuse for doing that. Of course, it's disgusting. It should be condemned in the strongest possible terms. But at the end of the day, we all know that there's always there are lots of underlying social factors, and we have to deal with those things in the long term to address them. Now, is it a solution? One of the first things that pop into my mind is a murder that took place in San Fernando of a young lady, a teacher, from an estranged husband who had, I think, a number of legal firearms. So whilst you're exactly right, it's a balancing exercise. I am more concerned about domestic disputes than I am about vigilante justice per se. Because the domestic issues, when you have crimes of passion, it's very easy when people have easy access to legal firearms, that when your emotions are out of control, you tend to perhaps use them irresponsibly. The critical thing here is having a proper system for the grant of FULs, and you don't just have to have a system for the grant, but the renewal of the licenses. The law actually provides for a renewal process and a sort of a check and balance system. You are supposed to pay the fee every year to the TTPS to get your license renewed and so on. Why is it it should not be automatic. That's my first thing. It should not be that you are allowed to pay money and renew a FUL if you have one. So if you qualify for the FUL, it's almost like continuous professional development. You're supposed to show every time you renew, or maybe not every year, maybe you can do it every 2 years or something like that. But you're supposed to show that you're doing the requisite training. The police should be checking to make sure there's no change in your circumstances, for example. And I'm not saying this applies to everybody, but if I were the police in the district and I knew somebody had an FUL, and I knew, for example, they came to renew their firearm, but they're going through a very nasty divorce, custody battle, something like that with a estranged spouse, the spouse has applied for protection order against them and so on, that is something that will weigh as a factor that will weigh on my mind if I'm renewing an FUL. But again, we have silos. So you could actually go to the courts and take out a protection order against somebody and come to the police station in your district and ask them to serve that person. And this estranged spouse or whoever it is you have taken out that protection order against, go and walk into that same station and pay their $200 or $500 or whatever it is and renew their FUL. And there's no connectivity between those things. Now, isn't that ridiculous? So the system has to be fixed And the system has to work in such a way that there is a responsible method of managing legal firearms. I have absolutely nothing against people who are responsible, trained, and psychologically, mentally, emotionally, physically capable of managing a firearm, for them having firearms to protect themselves and their families. I think it is quite advisable in this situation and the circumstances we live under. You have a cash intensive business. You have to. I was as a drive-through ATM, and that's where I live that I use all the time, right? Laziness. And it's very close to, those drop boxes where you can put cash in.
Yes.
I was there using the ATM and I saw someone getting out of the vehicle to drop cash. And you should just see the way this man looked. I mean, he just looked so terrified. He came in a very, you could look at someone and know he looked like a very well-to-do businessman and so on. But he's driving a van, very simple. I'm sure this man has probably some really nice vehicles, just based on how he was dressed, etc. But you try to be as low-key as you can, and the man is literally looking like he was about to have a panic attack, dropping off his cash into this thing. And if you have a cash-intensive business, you are a walking target, and there's nothing wrong once you have the, you're altogether capable for you to have a firearm. People target. I've noticed a lot of the home invasions are happening at homes where there are businesses. The one in Arangua is the Baby, Apala. The one in Davie, I actually know that business. It's right on the main road. It's a place where people will be spending cash, and people assume that there's cash on premises, right? So in situations like that, I think that I have nothing against the responsible grant of firearms.
A couple of things. One, I think you've just made an argument for businesses to go cashless and for there to be a greater push for cashless businesses. That doesn't necessarily resolve the problem of people still being fearful within their business place or within the environment. But also, it's the very first point. I'm glad that you raised it, that there is domestic abuse can also be linked to bigger issues in terms of crime. However, the flip side of that is, isn't it going to be very difficult? Because as much as you want to carry out physical testing and psychometric testing and all these things in order for somebody to be granted their FUL, and when they actually pay their annual fee to be granted that again. In many instances, domestic abuse victims don't even report these crimes or are very fearful of reporting these crimes, as has been mentioned. So how are we going to really get to the bottom of this or figure out the truth before individuals are actually granted these licenses?
Yeah, I mean, that is a challenge. There is actually, I believe, a requirement. I don't know if it's in the law, I can't recall, but I know procedurally at least, when you apply for your FUL, if you live with someone or you're married to them, they have to consent. Again, if you do that 10 years ago when you get the FUL, no, I might want to revoke my consent later on. So you have to do that follow-up. But you're right, a lot of people don't report it. If you're a spouse and you're being abused and so on, and the police come to your home and say, hi, your husband has applied for a firearm, would you object? I don't know that the woman living in a domestic violence situation is going to tell the police, I object because he's beat me.
So the flip side of this as well is that I can pass all these tests today. I can say, okay, he's been evaluated on all levels, but then tomorrow I can trip.
Of course, and that's a risk, and that's why I think the word balance is why you have to balance. So do we look at better testing? Do we look at better methods? Do we look at more spontaneous home visits and follow-ups to make sure firearms are kept in proper safes away from children? Do we fix the system and try to balance it against the risk of, because you have to weigh the risk of somebody tripping off today and using the firearm to kill their spouse, but even though they've passed all the tests, versus the risk of a home invasion. I think right now the majority of people in Trinidad might think the risk of them becoming a victim of a home invasion or a violent crime might actually be higher than their spouse tripping off on them, even though they've done all the testing. That is to say, it's very hard to predict and to stop domestic crimes.
Well,
the key thing there really might be more of a social intervention, so that encourage people then to report and to leave and to do, as opposed to just saying, well, no firearms for anybody, because chances are you might trip off and kill your spouse.
Well,
you
of
know?
course, as with anything, there's no silver bullet. There's no, this is the best answer for all categories that we're considering. Less lethal weapons was in the news, not too long ago with regards to pepper spray and potentially tasers. Now, the thing is, their use might be safer than firearms. It might not necessarily be as lethal for members of the public to utilize that if they feel that they're attacked. And if utilized in domestic abuse, it wouldn't automatically lead to serious or critical injury. It still could, but it's not necessarily going to happen. However, it could be that perhaps some people think, well, the criminals aren't going to fear pepper spray as much as a gun, or it might be harder to defend myself than with a firearm. It might not have the reach or the range or the stopping power or the intimidating factor. But have you heard anything with regards to utilizing these other options? Because while they might have their cons, they also do have their pros for society. It's just that we haven't really seen much out of it, recently.
So a big push for the pepper spray in particular came when we had the candlelight vigil movement, the Andrea Barrett issues, etc., because of the fear that particularly young women felt being in taxis and so on. That's a sort of, again, the scenario being you're sitting in a vehicle and the driver starts taking a wrong turn into some lonely track, or they start grabbing you in the backseat of the vehicle, because it's really a setup with a driver and a passenger and they attack you, etc. You can quickly try to defend yourself. Less applicable in a situation where 6 bandits enter your home and with cutlasses at the neck of your grandchild, and they have a firearm and they're pointing it at you. What you gonna do? Whip out your pepper spray and walk up to them with the firearm and spray them. You understand? So I mean that whole idea of the non-lethal weapons really was for a particular scenario. I think it's applicable. Saying that though, however, I'm very disappointed because I remember this debate very well because I was one of the people who really pushed on that pepper spray issue. We were told that this whole system is going to be totally electronic and it's going to be a quick bam, bam, bam. You just send in this, that. That was, I think, about a year ago, 2 years ago, something. And I don't even know that anybody has actually gotten the license yet. I think that's a few people have been granted the import permits. And I don't know that it's actually widely available on the market. So I can't say that anybody has really benefited from that law that we took a very long time to debate in Parliament. I thought that the process was far too cumbersome. I think many of the independent senators also agreed, but the government was very concerned about the abuse of pepper spray. It's amazing that we have a lot of emphasis and we hear a lot coming out of the government when it comes to the abuse of things that people may wish to use to defend themselves, firearms, legal licensed firearms, pepper spray, etc. But we don't hear a lot about the absence of a very wide and performing CCTV camera network. We don't hear a lot about the absence of enough police officers. I saw today that the association is saying there are 1,400 people short of. We are not seeing. Things which could really make a bigger difference.
You made a comment off here just before we started that one of the misconceptions people have is, we call for the death penalty, and this is not the first time. The business chambers recently are the latest call. But we have to detect the criminals first. I think that philosophy also could be applied with the use of firearms to defend yourself, because there is the fear, and my co-host has mentioned it many a times before, about vigilante justice, but that is justice without a trial to prove guilt, and potentially could cause innocence to be wrapped up. Any concern with regards to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, because we are in a place right now where, look, I don't like to use the term, but I was reading a book written by this guy from, he's a Harvard professor, but he talks about, he had a lot to do with the movements and leadership and so on in Africa. And he talks about failed states. And I feel like we are quickly becoming a failed state. because the number one, and he was making the argument that delivery of political goods, public goods, the number one public good that is supposed to be delivered to the country is security. And if you're not delivering security, it's just everything breaks down after that. And that's where we've reached now. When you're living in a high tension environment like that, it's very easy for people to want to take the law into their own hands. I've heard the calls for death penalty. I'm always quite, I wouldn't say amused, but disturbed that people blame parliamentarians and say, why don't you all pass the law to have the death penalty? And I'm like, that is the law. Right? That is the law. We don't need to pass a law. That is the law. That penalty is the law. I don't necessarily agree with it. That's my personal view, not a political one, not a legal one. The death penalty is the law. It is to implement the law. And that's what we have in this country. We have an implementation deficit. Now, the point is, yes, you have to actually detect. We have a detection rate of something like 13 or 14%. That's less than 5. Less than 1 in 5 criminals are being caught. So, and you have to catch them, you have to prosecute them, you have to convict them, and then you have to actually implement the death penalty according to the law. Now, the second thing is that the death penalty is only applicable to murder. All of these home invasions, all of these sexual offenses and so on, if it doesn't result in a murder, the death penalty isn't applicable. Yes, it might instill some fear in the mind of the average criminal if this man, but I mean, I don't know that it really is going to make a short-term difference. What I believe will make a much bigger difference is if criminals believe there is a very much stronger likelihood that they're going to be caught. If it is that if I were to pick up the newspaper and instead of seeing home invasion, I could see, man denied bail when police present CCTV footage of him committing crime. CCTV results in arrest of XYZ, man convicted not because the witness dead after the 10 years that the matter comes up in the court, or because the witness is afraid and don't want to give evidence, or because the witness fails under cross-examination, etc. I want to hear that the CCTV was there, capture you there. I want to hear that we pick up your DNA on the crime scene. I want to, those are the things that will make a difference in the mind of the criminal thinking about going into somebody's home and robbing them and beating them.
Well, Senator, this is where we have to end the conversation, but I especially like the last couple of points. I think we tried to make them, but you made it very well there. We need the detection rate to be higher and the conviction rate to be higher.
Definitely. Thanks again for having me, and we will chat again soon. Take care.
Have a good day. Keep well.
Thank you, Senator.